Power Factor fans, here we are again at Snoqualmie Valley Rifle Club, and I'm going to do a little follow-up on the interview with Chris Hodgdon episode that we did. If you saw that episode, you'll know that Chris addressed the shortage of Hodgdon's Clays series of powders. And the reason was they had a catastrophic fire at the powder plant in Australia where the Clays powders were made. So they've been quite difficult to get the last few years. But Clays production has started up again in Canada. And one of the things that we wanted to do, we meaning Power Factor Show, is test the old Clays versus the new Clays and see just how closely it mimics the performance of the original Clays powder. And then also another powder that we wanted to test is if you're familiar with Alliant brand powders, which used to be Hercules brand powders. They're the very well-known brand, probably best known for Bullseye and Unique powders, which have been around for over 100 years. But today they're probably best known for their Dot series of powders, just like Hodgdon is known for their Clays, International Clays. Alliant is known for Red Dot, Green Dot, and Blue Dot. And a new powder from Alliant is supposedly, although I don't know if it's their intent or not, but they've got a rough equivalent of Hodgdon Clays, and Alliant calls it Clay Dot. So what I wanted to do was run some chrono tests of original Clays, Hodgdon Clays, that is, the new Hodgdon Clays from Canada, and then Alliant's Clay Dot, and see just how equivalent they are. So I'm going to run two tests. The load that my go-to load for 230 grain bullets for major power factor is 3.8 grains of Hodgdon Clays. And I know that makes major. That's actually my revolver load. I don't shoot it too much out of auto pistols, but that's going to be kind of the base load that I'm familiar with, that I've shot a lot. So we're going to chrono the 3.8 grains of Clays with a Rainier plated 230 grain bullet, and then to test the weight equivalency of new Clays and old Clays, we're going to use a 3.8 grain charge of new Clays and see if at that same weight we have roughly equivalent velocities. 732, 744, 748. Okay, so our average velocity for the old Australian Clays was about where I expected, about 168 power factor. So now we're going to go with the new Clays. This is the new Canadian-made Clays, 3.8 grains with the Rainier 230 grain round nose bullet. 719. 698, 698, 733. Okay, 3.8 of Clay Dot with a Rainier 230. 681, 725. 695. So in addition to checking the weight by weight comparison, loading all three powders at 3.8 grains, I also wanted to do a volume equivalency test. So what I did was, after loading 3.8 grains of the old Clays powder, I dumped out the powder measure and refilled it with new Clays without making any adjustments, just to see if it would be more closely equivalent by volume rather than weight. And then I did the same thing with Clay Dot. So here we are with this load. These next series of shots will be with the powder measure adjusted for 3.8 grains of old Clays, but substituting whatever the volume equivalent is of new Clays. 768, 752, 785. Now we're going to use, again, the volume equivalent of Alliant Clay Dot with the powder measure adjusted for 3.8 of the old clays. This is going to be the volume equivalent of Alliant Clay Dot powder. $6.99, 716, 744. So it looks like our equivalency in a way by weight, clay dot and new clays are very similar to each other and don't give quite the velocity of the original clays. When we change to the volume equivalent, using the powder measure setting for 3.8 grains of clays, the new clays was quite energetic, and the clay dot not so much, not as much. So if you have been using the old clays powder like I have for 10 years or more, you probably will have to do some load development to get back to your old velocity. My tried and true load of 3.8 of old clays with a 230 went 171 power factor from a 5-inch 1911. Probably I would expect it to also make major from my 4-inch revolver, since that's the gun I usually shoot it in. But then the variations between old clays and new clays, I think you're definitely going to have to do a little load development. It looks like, in my gun anyway, probably 0.2 of a grain increase from 3.8 to 4.0 to consistently make major. And then clay dot, you know, again, it's not expected to be exactly the same or equivalent to either of the clays powders from Hodgdon, but it is roughly equivalent. If you're looking for a fast burning pistol powder that's inexpensive, it's a powder that's going to be right in that same burn rate area, and your data will need to do some load development, but it's close enough that it's not going to be radically different, a few tenths either way depending on your bullet weight. So I think, just based on this brief experiment, the new clays is pretty close. You're going to have to do a little development, but if you want to try another powder in this day and age, depending on what powders are available to you, if you can get Alliant Clay Dot, it's probably as good of a substitute for clays as buying some other powder. Like when I've run out of clays, been unable to find it, I've fallen back on Winchester 231, which is a powder I used 15 years ago, and it's a tried and true 45 powder, but you know, this new Clay Dot, it seems close to clays in terms of its performance, so it's just another alternative if you're looking for a powder for pistol, major power pistol 45. And I'll probably give it a look if I can get a supply, but I just got a small quantity of both of the new clays and the Clay Dot from Steve. So if it's available in bigger quantities, I might do some more development in other calibers, but for 45 auto, looks good to go. Hi again, Power Factor fans, it's Rick, and if you've been watching for the last few months, you'll know about my attempts to turn my Detonics Combat Master into a pistol for bug competition in IDPA. Harkening all the way back to last August, I shot the gun at the Washington State IDPA Championship and determined that it had broken. A little piece had chipped off the slide, and I was trying to decide, did I want to get it repaired? Did I want to try to replace the slide? And there were some considerations there. The gun was made with the serial number. The serial number that's stamped on the frame is also written on the barrel and the slide, so I really kind of wanted to keep the parts together, and I wasn't really sure about getting it fixed. But a gunsmith on 1911 forum recommended that I send it to a place called Pullman Arms in Worcester, Massachusetts. and I sent it off to them, and about a week later it came back. I'm sure the producer will insert a still photo of what the gun looked like when it was broken. And here it is. If you'll recall, this is where the damage was, right here. This inside corner of the slide essentially chipped away, exposing the top of the extractor and compromising the ability of the firing pin stop to locate and keep the extractor properly positioned. You want it not to turn. Clocking is an issue if the firing pin stop isn't wide enough, doesn't fit in it securely in this slot. It can allow the extractor to rotate, and you don't want clocking because it can or will lead to inconsistent ejection. You'll get a weird ejection pattern. The rounds will be, empty cases will be thrown all over the place. So anyway, here's the repaired Detonics Combat Master. The original extractor went right back in there. I got a new Harrison design firing pin stop. Spent an hour plus fitting that meticulously. I didn't want any wobbliness in the fit to, I don't know what caused the damage, but I thought if it were an issue with the firing pin stop maybe torquing around in there as the gun was sliding, I didn't want to cause that problem again. So I fitted a new firing pin stop in there, and I think we're ready to go. The only telltale mark is, I think, just resulting from heat of having to weld this part up, is just a little heat discoloration here, but other than that, it looks like it's ready to rock. Now, as you'll also remember, in past episodes I discussed trying to knock an ounce of weight off the gun for bug competition. The 2015 rulebook established size requirements for bug, and then also a weight limit of 29 ounces. Now, the Combat Master in stock form with a magazine in place weighs about 30 ounces. So I was trying to figure out how am I going to get an ounce off the gun. The problem is because the Combat Master already is lightened in the areas that you would normally think, okay, I can take a little weight off here, I can take a little weight off there. It wasn't really going to work very well. The lowest hanging fruit on a gun like this is a steel mainspring housing, which weighs about 2 ounces. So if this gun weighed 30 ounces and I could just swap out the steel mainspring housing, I'd be good to go, except this gun comes with an aluminum mainspring housing. Likewise, you can lighten the slide, maybe do some little decorative cuts, forward cocking serrations, but it's got this big swoop cut here at the back. So the slide is essentially already lightened, and I don't like that as a place to take any more weight off the slide. I want the reciprocating weight to resist unlocking and for other reasons. But I just have pretty much decided that even though there's little tenths of an ounce here and there, I could replace the steel trigger with a carbon fiber trigger. Just little things like that. The safety is a little too wide for the new bug rules. Really, it can't be any wider than the grip panels, so I'm gonna have to shave that down. And it wasn't gonna happen. So I've decided I'm gonna go the other way and go CCP, which also requires some compromises. One, CCP division is a minor power factor division, so I'm going to load my 45 down probably about as low as I can and still get reliable function. I'm not going to go crazy. I'm thinking maybe 150 power factor will get it done. But because and I'll still have to deal with the width of the ambi, it's still a little too wide, that'll have to go narrower. But because the weight limit is 37 ounces, I don't have to be worried about weight at all. My 30-ounce gun is actually quite light. So instead of trying to get the weight off, I'm going to go the other way. This is an SNA mainspring housing magwell made out of steel, so it weighs about 2 ounces. And so I'm going to swap that into the Combat Master, so that'll raise my weight from 30 ounces to about, well, close to 32, over 31 ounces. Give me a little bit better reloading with the magwell funnel. I've had to do a little bit of work on this to fit it. I'm going to have to do a little bit more. I was surprised it sticks up about 1/16 of an inch above the frame along the edges. So I'm going to contour that a little bit. But get that on there, get some grips made. most people, I think, if you're a 1911 person and you have an SNA or any kind of a add-on magwell that extends below the frame, you want magwell grips on there that bridge the gap between the frame and the magwell, so you don't have that gnarly look of the beveled grips and then a gap and then the magwell. So I'm going to get some grips that fit flush to the bottom of the frame. Probably have to have those custom made because there's just not that many companies making Detonics grips. But that's my plan now, and we'll talk about that going forward. I'm going to test fire this in its stock form. I don't expect there to be anything to go wrong, but test fire it in its stock form, make sure it's running all right, and then start in on the modifications, the grips, the magwell funnel, the skinnier ambi safety, and go CCP shooting with it. I mean, we got a state championship coming up this summer. I've shot this gun in more than one sanctioned match, so I'm kind of looking forward to getting it back into action. An old favorite of mine. I've had the gun for 15 years, so it'll be fun to just kind of get it going. And I will talk. It was interesting. I posted on my own club's forum, hey, is anybody loading 45 minor for CCP? And it was chirp, chirp, chirp. I guess nobody's doing it. So I'll come up with some loads. We'll talk about them on the show. Like I said, I'm going to run it as slow as I can and to maintain reliable function, and we'll see how it goes.